Donald Trump has ordered the US Navy to shoot and kill boats laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The US president says US minesweepers are currently clearing the strait of Iranian mines.
Tonight, President Trump issuing a new warning to Iran, posting orders to the Navy to, quote, shoot and kill any boat mining the Strait of Hormuz.
At 5:47 a.m. local time, the Strait of Hormuz looked calm enough to fool anyone who had never fought there before. The water was flat, the sky was pale. Tankers crawled through the shipping lane like half-awake giants. And just north of the traffic separation line, one American destroyer was moving east at 22 knots, radar alive, helicopters chained to the deck, every antenna on the ship quietly listening to Iran breathe. The USS Gravely had spent the last 6 hours screening the carrier strike group's southern flank. Not glamorous work, not the kind of mission that gets headlines. Just the hard, repetitive business of standing between a billion-dollar carrier and whatever bad idea someone on the coast might launch before breakfast. Then the E-2D Hawkeye saw it first. A cluster of heat blooms rose off the Iranian shoreline west of Bandar Abbas. Not aircraft, not artillery. Too fast, too bright. The airborne controller didn't waste time dressing it up. Possible anti-ship launch, multiple tracks, bearing north-northeast, stand by. Inside Gravely's Combat Information Center, every voice stopped for half a second. Then the room came alive. The tactical action officer leaned over the console, eyes locked on the emerging track file. Range building, altitude low, speed subsonic and climbing. The signature fit too well to ignore. Cruise missiles. The ship's 1MC cut across every passageway and compartment in the hull. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. Missile inbound. Missile inbound. Steel doors slammed, boots hammered ladders. Sailors ran forward, aft, and below decks with the practiced violence of people who had drilled this exact nightmare until it lived in muscle memory. On the bridge, the officer of the deck ordered a course change 10 degrees starboard. Small move, small profile shift. In missile defense, small changes matter. A seeker looking for where you should be instead of where you are only has to be wrong once. The first SPY radar solution stabilized 11 seconds later. 4 inbound cruise missiles. Sea skimming. Coming in low enough to hide inside surface clutter. Behind them, 23 slower air contacts lifting out of the morning haze. The TAO didn't need a second look. The missiles were the knife. The drones were the hands grabbing your wrists so you couldn't block it. Iran hadn't fired a random salvo. They had built a layered attack. Cheap one-way drones up front to flood the scope, absorb attention, and pull weapons out of position. Then the anti-ship missiles down the seam. And they had aimed it at the wrong American ship. Gravely was not a tanker escort, not a logistics ship, not some lightly armed patrol vessel. She was an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, 96 vertical launch cells. Aegis combat system, standard missiles, electronic warfare, close-in weapons. The naval equivalent of picking a fight with a Hornet and discovering the Hornet is carrying a shotgun. At 18 miles, the drone tracks multiplied. The SPY radar sorted them into staggered lines, pushing south across the water at barely 110 knots. One-way attack drones, the cheap kind, airframes simple enough to build in batches, guidance good enough to hit a radar face, a helicopter, an exposed gun crew, or a fuel line if nobody stopped them first. Each one disposable. Each one still lethal. On the signal bridge, the electronic warfare team began pumping false returns into the battle space, throwing out a distorted radar picture that made the destroyer seem wider, farther, and slightly displaced from where it actually was. Think of it like someone trying to hit your parked car while you keep changing the streetlights around it. The target is still there. But the picture in the attacker's head stops matching reality. At 14 miles, Gravely fired first. 2 SM-2S blasted out of the forward VLS in violent white columns, rolling over almost immediately and knifing northwest toward the lead missile pair. A second later, a third missile joined them. Then a fourth. The destroyer's fire control illuminators snapped to life, painting the inbound threats in time sequence, feeding the interceptors the guidance they needed for the final seconds. Because this is the part people miss. The missile leaving the ship isn't the hard part. The hard part is keeping that chain intact while everything is moving at once. Your ship is turning, the sea is pitching, the target is skimming 5 meters above the water. The radar beam has to stay married to the geometry long enough for the shot to matter. At 12 miles, the first Iranian missile disappeared in a flash low on the horizon. At 10 miles, the second broke apart and skipped fire across the surface. 2 down. 2 still inbound. And the drones kept coming. The forward 5-inch gun traversed left, then snapped back right as the Tau made the ugliest decision of the morning. The remaining cruise missiles stayed priority 1. They could kill the ship in one clean hit. The drones would have to be handled by everything else. The Mach 45 opened up. 70-pound shells climbed into the air and burst ahead of the lead drone cluster, spraying fragmentation across a lane of targets too cheap to deserve the ammunition being spent on them. One drone vanished outright. Another rolled inverted and fell. A third kept flying with half a wing gone, stubborn in the way only simple machines can be. The gun crew never saw any of it. They felt it. Lock, fire, recoil, cycle, reacquire. The rhythm traveled through steel and deck plates and boots. At 9 miles, the first of the remaining anti-ship missiles split lower, trying to hug the water so tightly that it nearly vanished inside the sea return. The second offset east, forcing the ship's radar and illuminators to work a wider angle than anyone wanted. The TAO keyed the helm again. Hard left rudder. Come to course 085. Make turns for flank. Gravely heeled into the turn, wake boiling behind her in a hard white curve. It wouldn't outrun the missile. Nothing at sea outruns a missile. But it would force the seeker to solve a moving crossing angle under heavy jamming while the interceptors closed the distance. The first of the last 2 Iranian missiles died at 7 miles. The second kept coming. Not because the defense failed. Because the missile battery on shore had timed its salvo well enough to make success look sloppy. The inbound track punched through the first engagement window, dropped lower still, and surged directly into the zone where every second starts disappearing faster than the numbers on the screen can update. 6 miles. 5. 4.2. The Mach 15 phalanx came alive. If you have never heard a close-in weapon system open up for real, imagine a chainsaw made of lightning. The white dome rotated, locked, and spat 2 0mm rounds in a stream so dense it looked like the ship had torn a glowing line through the air. The missile entered the envelope. Then, it did not exist anymore. A fireball skipped across the water off Gravely's port bow, showering the sea with broken metal and burning fuel. For 2 seconds, the ship had space to breathe. Then surface search broke the silence. Fast movers, multiple contacts, bearing 030, range 8 miles, speed 45 knots. Of course, because in the Strait of Hormuz, nobody sends 1 problem when they can send 3. The radar now showed 9 Iranian fast attack craft bursting out from coastal traffic, low hulls hammering through the chop, wakes stacked behind them. Some carried rockets, some heavy machine guns. And some, the ones nobody ever wants to be wrong about, looked suspiciously heavy in the bow. Explosive boats. Floating shape charges with an engine. The tactical geometry turned ugly instantly. Gravely's main battery was busy with drones. Her missile defense channels had just come off cruise missile intercepts. The helicopters were still chained to the deck because missile threat had made launch too risky in the opening seconds. Now the ship had drones from the north and boats from the northeast, and no version of the map in which all of that could be solved elegantly. So the captain chose violence over elegance. He ordered another hard turn and drove the destroyer across the water in a way that forced the boats to spread if they wanted attack angles. A coordinated swarm is deadly because it compresses your decision cycle. 10 boats arriving together can saturate guns and attention. 10 boats arriving staggered become 10 separate funerals. The Mark 38 25mm mount found the lead craft first. Short burst. Engine block gone. The boat hooked right, rolled, and disappeared into its own spray. The 5-0. Cal teams joined in next. Tracer fire stitching the water in long red slashes. Not ideal range, not ideal target set. But at speed, with crews exposed and hulls light, you don't need perfection, you need disruption. 1 boat detonated early under fire, a flat orange bloom kicking up beside the others. The explosion itself became a weapon, showering fragments into the formation and forcing the pack wider. That bought Gravely 40 seconds. 40 seconds in a missile fight is a bank robbery. The drones were now inside 6 miles. The 5-inch gun went back to work, air-bursting shells into the densest parts of the inbound group, while the electronic warfare suite kept bending what it could off the ship's true line. Some drones chased ghosts. Some ignored the jamming entirely and kept coming on optical guidance, dumb enough to be dangerous. Then the second destroyer checked in. 24 miles southwest, USS Mason had been holding a parallel screen, quiet on emissions, farther out than the first attack planners may have accounted for. When the Hawkeye updated the common picture, Mason didn't ask questions. She just entered the fight. Her SPY radar grabbed the outer drone group and started thinning it from the flank. What had been 23 air contacts became 17. Then 14. Iran's attack had been built around fixing one ship in place and overwhelming it with timing. What they got instead was overlapping American coverage from a second berth they had not properly solved for. And that is where the mistake turned fatal. Because the moment Mason lit up, the whole shape of the battle changed. Gravely no longer had to win alone. She only had to stay alive long enough for the trap to close. The fast attack craft discovered that first. 2 MH-60Rs lifted off Mason's deck and came in low over the water, each carrying Hellfires built for exactly this kind of target. The helicopters never got dramatic, they just worked. One missile. One boat. Then another. Then another. The surviving craft scattered, trying to break line of sight, some turning north for the coast, others attempting a desperate southern swing that put them broadside to Gravely's guns. That ended badly. The drone count dropped to 8. Then 6. Then 4. Then the Hawkeye called the next piece. Additional launch signatures inland. Possible ballistic. Repeat. Possible ballistic. Every officer in both combat information centers understood the implication at once. The cruise missiles and drones were not necessarily meant to finish the job. They may have been meant to pin the escorts while a longer-range strike package aimed past them. At 28,000 feet, the Hawkeye refined the track. 3 ballistic missiles, medium-range profile, climbing fast, trajectory consistent with a shot into the Gulf operating area. Not at Gravely. Not at Mason. At the carrier. There are moments in naval combat where your local fight stops mattering emotionally, even though it still matters tactically. This was one of them. Gravely was still killing drones. Still dodging boats. Still sweeping for leakers. But everyone on that ship now knew there were 3 warheads in the sky, descending towards something much more valuable than a destroyer. And there was exactly one ship in the strike group built for that part of the problem. USS Thomas Hudner, farther southeast, had been operating in ballistic missile defense posture since before dawn. She had monitored the entire engagement with the kind of controlled silence that feels almost unnatural in war. While Gravely spent missiles on sea skimmers and Mason launched helicopters, Hudner had conserved the one magazine nobody wastes early. SM-3S. Exo-atmospheric interceptors. Weapons designed to leave the atmosphere, find a re-entry vehicle in near space, and kill it by colliding with it at absurd speed. No fragmentation, no proximity blast, just physics weaponized. Inside Hudner's CIC, the TAO had been building firing solutions from the first ballistic cue. 3 tracks, 3 opportunities, no room for sentiment, no room for error. When the geometry finally settled, he gave the order. 3 SM-3S erupted from the VLS in rapid sequence and climbed like something trying to escape Earth itself. Their boosters burned out high above the weather. Kinetic kill vehicles separated and kept going, small, precise, and almost offensively calm compared to the chaos below. Back on Gravely, the last serious boat threat was ending. The Phalanx erased one drone at terminal range. The 5-inch gun claimed another. A third, damaged and wobbling, crossed the bow too low and too fast and slammed into the water off the starboard quarter hard enough to throw spray onto the weather deck. No hit. Close enough to make everyone remember the margin. Then came the wait. Not for the drones. Not for the boats. For the sky. The Hawkeye updated first intercept. Track 1 lost. Second intercept. Track 2 lost. Third track continuing. Nobody in the strike group cheered. Not yet. Because the third ballistic missile was behaving wrong. The return had shifted, speed fluctuating, signature distorting. Possible decoy event. The Iranians had built a smarter final problem into the salvo than they had at the opening. One body shedding speed, another holding it. A split designed to force the interceptor to choose correctly with no second chance. Up in the black, far above the Gulf, the kill vehicle did what it had been made to do. It ignored the slowing object, committed to the hotter, faster body, and adjusted by a margin too small for human intuition to respect. Then the track vanished. 3 for 3. The carrier lived. And the battle in Hormuz stopped being about survival and started being about debt collection. The Hawkeye already had coastal launch points pinned from the opening signatures. Electronic support measures had refined emitter locations. Mason's helicopters had filmed wake trails from the fast attack craft leading back toward their dispersal areas. The Americans did not need to guess what had happened. They had watched it happen in layers. Now it was Iran's turn to be watched. Within minutes, Super Hornets were off the carrier deck, growlers behind them, tanker support extending the reach, the whole package building into the kind of response that makes launch crews reconsider their life choices during the short drive back to base. The coastal missile battery that had fired on Gravely never got a second shot. One pass by the strike package cratered the revetments. Another hit the reload vehicles caught on the access road. The boats that made it back to harbor found the harbor no safer. Fuel bladders burned. Ammunition sheds cooked off. Radar vans disappeared under precision-guided bombs so cleanly that operators nearby probably learned what happened from the shockwave. And somewhere in the middle of that unfolding disaster sat the original mistake. Iran had not attacked a helpless merchant ship. They had not found a carrier alone. They had not caught a tired patrol craft sleeping on watch. They had thrown a layered missile drone boat attack at an American Aegis destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz, inside supporting range of another Aegis destroyer, under the eyes of a Hawkeye, with a ballistic missile defense ship already on station, and a carrier air wing close enough to invoice them before the smoke cleared. That is not just bad luck. That is target selection malpractice. By 8:06 a.m. local time, the shipping lane was open again. Tankers resumed their slow crawl through Hormuz. The sea covered the wreckage the way it always does, cold and indifferent, and quick to erase the shape of other people's plans. On Gravely, damage control teams checked compartments that had never been breached. Gun crews reloaded. Deck crews washed blast residue into the wake. In CIC, the tactical plot was already being cleaned up, hostile tracks disappearing one by one until the screen looked almost ordinary again. Almost. But ordinary had ended the moment Iran decided to test the wrong ship. Because a U.S. destroyer is not just a hull with guns. It is radar linked to radar. Missile to missile. Helicopter to helicopter. Ship to ship. A floating piece of a much larger machine built to absorb exactly this kind of morning and then keep fighting long enough to make the other side regret starting it. And in Hormuz, regret arrived right on schedule.